The champagne glass shattered before Marcia even realized she'd dropped it. Crystal shards exploded across marble floors like frozen tears, the sound swallowed by orchestra music and the polite laughter of wolves pretending to be civilized. But Marcia heard nothing except the roaring in her ears, that primal, visceral warning that came too late, always too late, as a scent hit her nostrils. Leather. Bourbon. Blood beneath cologne. No. The Moonridge pack gathering stretched across the grand hall in a tasteful display of wealth and power, silk banners bearing ancient pack symbols, ice sculptures of wolves mid-howl, servers in black carrying trays of delicacies that cost more than most wolves earned in a month. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the autumn moon hung fat and silver, witness to 500 wolves dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits, celebrating an alliance treaty that was supposed to unite the northern and southern territories. Marcia had worn navy blue. High-necked. Long sleeves. Always long sleeves. She'd come because her current pack, Riverside, small but respectable, had been invited, and refusing would have raised questions she couldn't afford to answer. She'd stayed near the edges, counting the minutes until she could slip away unnoticed, back to the tiny apartment above the bookstore where she worked, where the locks were good and the neighbors minded their business. She'd been careful. She'd been so careful. And then his hand closed around her arm. Not gently. Never gently. His fingers found the exact places they'd mapped 2 years ago, the soft inner flesh where bruises bloomed purple-black and faded to sickly yellow, where bones felt fragile under pressure, where pain could be inflicted without leaving marks visible to casual observers. Marcia. His voice was silk over razors. It's been too long. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Her wolf, the small, broken thing that lived beneath her ribs, curled into a ball and whimpered. Run. 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 But her body had learned a different lesson. Stillness meant survival. Silence meant he'd get bored faster. Fighting back meant. Jimmy. Her voice came out steady. A miracle. A lie. Let go. Around them, conversations continued. Wolves in Armani and Versace sipped champagne and discussed territory borders, mating bonds, the unseasonably warm weather. A female Omega glanced their way, saw Jimmy's hand locked around Marcia's arm, saw the white pressure of his grip, the way Marcia had gone rigid as a deer in headlights, and looked away. They always looked away. Let go? Jimmy's laugh was soft, intimate, the kind he used to use before the first blow landed. He pulled her closer, and she smelled bourbon on his breath, sharp and mean. Baby, I just found you. You disappeared. Changed packs. Blocked my calls. That's not how mates treat each other. We're not mates. The words tasted like ash. You rejected me. You said. I said a lot of things. His thumb pressed into her pulse point, and her heartbeat stuttered. But bonds don't break just because we want them to. You know that. I know you feel it. She did. That was the worst part. The mate bond they'd formed 3 years ago, young and stupid and convinced love could fix broken things, still hummed beneath her skin like an infection that wouldn't heal. Weakened. Damaged. But there. Proof that the moon goddess had a cruel sense of humor. The rejection was mutual, Marcia said, each word carefully measured. The council witnessed it. It's done, Jimmy. Nothing's done until I say it's done. His grip tightened, and pain shot up her arm, bright and familiar and wrong. Her vision blurred. Not here. Not in front of everyone. Not after she'd worked so hard to disappear, to become invisible, to build a life where no one asked about the shadows under her eyes or why she flinched when doors slammed. Remove your hand. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a command that vibrated through the floor, rattled champagne glasses, made every wolf in the grand hall freeze mid-conversation. Including Jimmy. Marcia's head snapped up, following the source of that voice, and her breath caught. Across the hall, partially concealed by marble columns and shadows that seemed to cling to him like living things, stood a man who made every other wolf in the room look like children playing dress-up. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that strained against an immaculate black suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked capable of breaking bones, and eyes. Oh God, his eyes. Silver. Pure molten silver, glowing with barely contained wolf, fixed on Jimmy's hand around her arm with an intensity that made the air itself feel dangerous. The Alpha King of the Northern bloodline. Philip Jeff. Marcia had never seen him up close. Nobody did. He existed in whispers and rumors, the ancient Alpha who'd unified the Northern packs through strategic brutality, who'd eliminated every challenger to his throne before most wolves knew a challenge had been issued, who ruled his territory with an iron fist wrapped in calculated violence. He was legend. Nightmare. Power given form. And he was staring at Jimmy like a predator deciding which bone to break first. I said, Philip repeated, his voice dropping to a register that made Marcia's wolf whimper for entirely different reasons, remove your hand. Jimmy's fingers spasmed, then released. Marcia stumbled back, cradling her arm, her skin already blooming with red marks that would darken to purple by morning. Around them, wolves had stopped pretending not to notice. 500 pairs of eyes tracked between Jimmy, Marcia, and the Alpha King emerging from the shadows like vengeance incarnate. Alpha King. Jimmy's voice had lost its cruel edge, replaced by careful respect. This is a private matter between mates. You are not her mate. 4 words. Flat. Final. Absolute. Philip moved through the crowd, and it parted like water before a shark. He didn't rush. Didn't need to. Every step was measured, controlled, radiating the kind of authority that made dominant wolves lower their eyes and submissive wolves press themselves against walls. He stopped 3 feet from Jimmy. Then his gaze shifted to Marcia, and something in those silver eyes made her forget how to breathe. Recognition. Not the casual acknowledgement of seeing another wolf at a gathering. Something deeper. Older. Intimate, in a way that made no sense because she'd never met him, never spoken to him, never even been in the same room as. Are you hurt? Philip asked, and his voice had gentled, fractionally, barely, but enough that Marcia heard the question beneath the question. How badly did he hurt you? How long has this been happening? Why didn't you tell someone? Why didn't you tell me? I'm fine, she lied. His jaw tightened. Show me your arm. Alpha King, I don't think. Show. Me. It wasn't a request. Wasn't even really a command. It was inevitability given voice, and Marcia found herself extending her arm before conscious thought caught up. Philip's hand closed around her wrist, so carefully, so gently, with a reverence that made her chest ache, and pushed up her sleeve. The bruises were already forming. Finger-shaped marks, dark and damning, exactly where Jimmy's hand had been. But beneath those fresh marks, Philip's thumb traced older scars, white lines and faded discoloration that spoke of injuries healed badly, bones broken and set wrong, years of damage hidden under fabric and lies. His eyes flicked to hers. Then to Jimmy. And when he spoke, his voice carried across the entire grand hall, a declaration witnessed by 500 wolves, recorded by the moon herself. Marcia Rick is under my protection. Permanently. Any wolf who touches her answers to me. Any wolf who threatens her disappears. He paused, letting that sink in, letting every dominant wolf in the room understand exactly what he meant. No trial. No mercy. No second chances. The silence was absolute. Then Jimmy laughed, high and panicked and wrong. You can't just claim someone else's. She is not yours. Philip's hand remained on Marcia's wrist, anchor and promise. She never was. And if you ever come near her again, I will personally ensure they never find your body. Jimmy's face went white. Then red. Then purple with rage. You think you can threaten me? My pack won't stand for. Your pack, Philip interrupted, will be informed that you are no longer welcome in Northern Territory. Effective immediately. You have 1 hour to cross the border. After that, you're fair game. This is insane. You can't banish me for 1 hour. Philip's eyes flashed pure silver, and his wolf pressed so close to the surface that Marcia could feel it, ancient, powerful, absolutely ruthless. I suggest you start running. Jimmy looked around wildly, seeking support, allies, someone to back him up. He found nothing but averted gazes and uncomfortable silence. Even his own pack members had stepped back, distancing themselves from the confrontation. Smart wolves knew better than to stand between an alpha king and his claimed territory. And Marcia, bruised, exhausted, broken Marcia, had just become exactly that. Jimmy snarled something incoherent and shoved through the crowd, disappearing into the night. Sayridal wolves followed, his friends, his pack, everyone who'd ever looked the other way while he systematically destroyed her. Gone. Just like that. Marcia stared at Philip, her mind unable to process what had just happened. Why, she whispered. Why would you do that? Philip's thumb traced one of the older scars on her wrist, so gentle it almost hurt. When he looked at her, his expression was unreadable, but something flickered in those silver eyes. Something like guilt. Like secrets kept too long. Like protection offered from shadows because stepping into the light would have revealed truths neither of them was ready to face. Because, he said quietly, for her ears only, I've been keeping you alive for 2 years. And I'm done hiding. The world tilted. 2 years? 2 years? But before Marcia could demand answers, before she could run, scream, process any of what was happening, Philip released her wrist and addressed the crowd. The gathering is over. Everyone out. Now. Wolves scattered like leaves before a storm. And Marcia stood frozen in the center of the grand hall, champagne still drying on marble floors, her arm throbbing with fresh bruises and older pain, staring at the Alpha King who claimed he'd been protecting her. From the shadows. Without her knowledge. Without her consent. Keeping her alive. Marcia's apartment smelled like lavender and lies. She'd chosen it specifically for that, 3rd floor walk-up, fire escape accessible from the bedroom window, landlord who didn't ask questions as long as rent arrived on time. The lavender came from dried bundles she'd hung everywhere, a futile attempt to mask the scent of fear that had seeped into the walls during the first 6 months, when she still woke screaming from nightmares where Jimmy found her. Now an Alpha King stood in her living room, and all her carefully constructed safety felt like tissue paper. You followed me home, Marcia said, keeping the kitchen island between them. Neutral observation. Not accusation. Accusation implied she had the right to be angry, and she wasn't sure what rights she had anymore. Philip hadn't moved since she'd unlocked the door. He stood perfectly still, hands loose at his sides, silver eyes cataloging every detail, the deadbolts, 3, the pepper spray on the entry table, the running shoes by the door positioned for quick escape. His gaze lingered on the bare walls, the absence of photographs, the life stripped down to essentials that could fit in a single suitcase. A life designed to disappear at a moment's notice. I've known where you lived for 18 months, he said quietly. I own the building. The floor tilted. You, what? The previous landlord was charging double market rate and ignoring maintenance requests. I bought the property, evicted him, and installed security cameras on every entrance. Philip's voice remained matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing weather rather than systematic invasion of privacy. The couple in 2B are retired enforcers from my pack. The woman in 3C is a former trauma nurse. The man in 1A is deaf but reads lips fluently and carries a licensed firearm. Marcia's hands gripped the counter edge. You surrounded me with guards. I surrounded you with people who would notice if you disappeared. The distinction seemed important to him. People who would care. People I trust. Without asking me. Would you have said yes? The question hung between them, sharp and honest. Marcia wanted to say yes, wanted to be the strong, independent woman who would have welcomed protection, who would have trusted a stranger's offer of safety. But she'd learned the hard way that trust was currency she couldn't afford. No, she admitted. Philip nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd always known. He moved then, slowly, telegraphing every motion, and settled into the worn armchair by her bookshelf. It groaned under his weight, a sound so domestic and normal that it made her chest ache. An alpha king in her thrift store furniture. Absurd. Impossible. Real. 2 years ago, Philip began, a female wolf showed up at the Northern Territory's free healing den. Fractured ribs, sprained wrist, defensive wounds on her forearms. She told the healers she'd fallen downstairs. His silver eyes found hers. You know the healers didn't believe her. Marcia's throat closed. She remembered that night, stumbling through rain, desperate and broken, choosing the Northern Territory because it was far from Jimmy's pack, because nobody knew her there. She'd been so careful with her story, practicing it during the bus ride, making sure every detail aligned. The healer who treated you, Philip continued, was my cousin. She called me because she recognized the pattern, defensive wounds, old injuries healed badly, a female wolf too terrified to press charges. She wanted to know if I could help. And you said? I said to document everything. Photograph every bruise, every scar, every injury that looked older than her story suggested. I said to give her my personal contact information and tell her she could call anytime, day or night, if she needed sanctuary. Marcia remembered the card, simple black with a silver phone number, no name. She'd thrown it away in a gas station bathroom, terrified Jimmy would find it. But you didn't call, Philip said. You paid cash, refused follow-up appointments, and disappeared before anyone could file an official report. So I did what I could from the shadows. Which was? His jaw tightened. Found out who hurt you. Jimmy Cross, beta of the Silverpine Pack, known for a temper he claimed was passion and violence he called discipline. I pulled pack records, 3 previous complaints from females who later retracted their statements. One suspicious disappearance ruled accidental. A pattern protected by his family's influence and the old guard belief that what happens between mates stays between mates. Fury bled into his voice, cold and controlled but unmistakable. I couldn't touch him without proof you'd never give. Couldn't banish him without cause that would hold up under council review. But I could make sure he never got close to you again. Philip leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. 7 times, Marcia. 7 times in 2 years, Jimmy tried to find you. Hired trackers. Bribed pack officials. Showed up at your workplace under false pretenses. Her blood ran cold. I never knew. That was the point. The trackers lost your trail when their equipment mysteriously malfunctioned. The officials suddenly transferred to remote territories. The workplace visit ended with Jimmy receiving a job offer in Alaska that he couldn't refuse. Philip's smile was sharp. I'm very good at making problems disappear. Marcia sank into the chair across from him, legs suddenly unreliable. Why? You don't know me. We've never even met before tonight. Haven't we? Something in his tone made her pause. She studied him, really looked, past the Alpha King authority and dangerous beauty, and found something familiar in the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself carefully still, like someone accustomed to their presence causing fear. "The bookstore," she whispered. "You're the customer who comes in Thursday evenings." Philip's expression flickered. "You noticed?" How could she not? Every Thursday at 6 p.m., like clockwork, a tall man in expensive casual wear would browse the history section, purchase a single book, and leave. He never spoke beyond polite pleasantries. Never made eye contact. Never lingered. She'd thought him shy. Reserved. Safe. "You were watching me. I was making sure you were okay." The distinction again, as if semantics changed the fundamental invasion. "Making sure you ate regularly, that your bruises faded, that you smiled at customers and meant it. Making sure you were healing." "That's not protection," Marcia said, anger finally sparking. "That's surveillance." "It's both." Philip didn't flinch from the accusation. "And I won't apologize for keeping you alive. I didn't ask you to." "No." His voice gentled. "You didn't. But someone had to, Marcia. Because the world was letting you die, and I couldn't. I couldn't stand by and watch that happen." The rawness in his admission stole her breath. This wasn't duty. Wasn't strategy. This was personal in a way that made no sense, unless... "The mate bond," she breathed. "You feel it too." Philip went very still. Then, slowly, he nodded. And Marcia's carefully reconstructed world shattered for the second time that night. "That's impossible." Marcia's voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against worn hardwood, putting distance between herself and the alpha king who'd just admitted to feeling a mate bond she'd never sensed. Never wanted to sense again. "I'm already bonded," she continued, hating how her voice shook. "Damaged, broken, but bonded. To Jimmy. The rejection didn't sever it completely, you know that's how it works. Wolves don't get second chance mates. We don't get do-overs just because the first one turned out to be a monster." Philip remained seated, but tension radiated from him like heat. "The bond you feel with Jimmy is a corruption. A wound that never healed properly because he kept reopening it every time he touched you. That doesn't change. What you feel with him isn't a true mate bond." Philip's eyes flashed silver. "It's trauma-mimicking connection. Your wolf associating his scent with survival, your body conditioned to respond to his proximity as threat assessment rather than recognition." Marcia's hands clenched into fists. "And what makes you such an expert on my bond?" "Because I've watched you for 2 years, Marcia. I've seen you flinch at raised voices. Freeze when men approach too quickly. I've watched you rebuild yourself piece by piece, teaching your wolf that touch doesn't always mean pain, that safety is possible." His voice dropped, intimate and devastating. "And I felt every moment you were in danger, every spike of fear, every nightmare that left you gasping awake at 3 a.m. She stared at him. "That's not possible unless the bond is already active. Already recognized by at least one party." Philip rose then, moving with predatory grace, closing the distance she'd created. "True mate bonds don't require mutual acknowledgement to exist. They just are. And ours has been pulling at me since the moment you walked into that healing den, bleeding and broken and still refusing to break." "No." Marcia backed away until her spine hit the wall. "No, I can't do this again. I can't be someone's mate, can't belong to someone who thinks they own me just because biology says. I don't want to own you." The quiet intensity in Philip's voice stopped her retreat. He stood 3 feet away, close enough to touch, far enough to let her breathe, and in his eyes she saw something that terrified her more than Jimmy's violence ever had. Devotion. Absolute and unshakable. "I want you safe," Philip said. "I want you whole." I want you to sleep through the night without nightmares, to walk into crowded rooms without mapping exits, to exist in this world without constantly looking over your shoulder. His hands flexed at his sides, as if physically restraining himself from reaching for her. If that means staying in the shadows for another decade, I'll do it. If it means you never acknowledge this bond, never accept me as yours, I'll survive it. But I will not stand by while wolves like Jimmy think they can touch you. You can't just decide to protect me without my consent. I already have. No apology. No regret. For 2 years, I've eliminated every threat before it reached you. The drunk wolf who followed you home from the grocery store? Relocated to a remote territory. The former packmate who showed up at the bookstore asking questions? Convinced to pursue opportunities overseas. Jimmy's brother, who planned to finish what Jimmy started. Philip's expression went cold. He won't be planning anything ever again. Ice flooded Marcia's veins. What did you do? What I had to. His gaze never wavered. What I'll do again, as many times as necessary, to keep you breathing. This was insane. He was insane. She should be terrified, should be running, should be calling the council to report an alpha king who'd just confessed to multiple murders. But she wasn't. Because underneath the shock and violation and fury, a treacherous part of her, the broken wolf who'd survived Jimmy through pure stubbornness, whispered, "He kept you safe. He's been keeping you safe. When no one else cared, when the world looked away, he was there." "This isn't love," Marcia said desperately. "This is obsession." "Maybe." Philip's admission was raw. "I don't know the difference anymore. All I know is that when you hurt, I feel it. When you're afraid, my wolf goes feral. When you smile at a customer or laugh at something in your books, it's the only peace I've felt in centuries." "Centuries?" His mouth curved, bitter, resigned. "I'm older than you think, Marcia. Old enough to know that true mate bonds are rare. Old enough to recognize one when it hits me. And old enough to understand that sometimes love means protecting someone from a distance because getting closer would only add to their trauma." The apartment's phone rang, shrill and sudden. They both froze. Marcia never got calls on the landline. It was a relic from the previous tenant, kept only because 911 operators preferred hardlines during emergencies. Her cell was the number people used, the few people who had it. It rang again. Philip's expression hardened. "Don't answer that." But Marcia was already moving, some instinct overriding common sense. She lifted the receiver. "Marcia Rick?" The voice was male, unfamiliar, edged with false sympathy. "This is Elder Sebastian Vernon of the Interpack Council. I'm calling regarding a formal complaint filed against Alpha King Philip Jeff." Her blood turned to ice. "What?" "Jimmy Cross has accused the Alpha King of unlawful claiming, territory violation, and abuse of power. The council takes these charges very seriously. We'll need you to testify at an emergency hearing." A pause. "Tomorrow. Dawn. Mandatory attendance for all parties involved." "But The Alpha King's continued rule depends on your testimony, Miss Rick. I trust you understand the gravity of this situation." Another pause, heavier. "And I trust you'll tell the truth about whether his protection was truly consensual." The line went dead. Marcia lowered the phone with numb fingers, turning to find Philip's expression carved from stone. "It's a trap," he said flatly. "Jimmy's family has been waiting for me to overstep. Tonight, in front of 500 witnesses, I gave them exactly what they needed, public proof that I've been involving myself in pack business outside my jurisdiction. Can they actually challenge you? If you testify that I've been controlling your life without permission? That I've eliminated wolves without due process? That I've violated council law to pursue a mate bond you never acknowledged?" His jaw clenched. Yes. They can strip my title, dissolve my pack bonds, and execute me for tyranny. The word execute hung in the air like a guillotine blade. But if I testify that I wanted your protection. Did you? Philip's eyes burned into hers. Because I won't ask you to lie, Marcia. Not even to save my life. You deserve the truth, and the truth is that I've been controlling your world from the shadows without your knowledge or consent. That's not protection. That's exactly what they'll call it, obsession masked as devotion. Marcia's mind raced. Tomorrow at dawn. A council hearing. Her testimony, the difference between life and death for the male who'd saved her 7 times without asking for gratitude. The male who might be her true mate. The male who'd just admitted he didn't know the difference between love and obsession. Why would Jimmy do this? She whispered. He got what he wanted, you banished him, publicly humiliated him. Why risk council involvement? Philip's expression turned grim. Because if I'm executed, my protection dies with me. And you, his voice roughened, become fair game again. Understanding crashed through her like a tidal wave. This wasn't about Philip's title or Jimmy's pride. This was about removing the only obstacle between Jimmy and his prey. And Marcia had exactly 12 hours to decide, tell the truth and condemn her protector to death? Or lie to save the Alpha King who'd been manipulating her life since the moment they'd met. Either way, come dawn, everything would change. Philip left at midnight. Not because Marcia asked him to, she hadn't, too paralyzed by the impossible choice looming at dawn, but because staying would only fuel the council's accusations. Before he disappeared into the shadows that seemed to welcome him like old friends, he pressed a card into her palm. Different from the one 2 years ago. This one had a name. If you decide I'm the monster they'll paint me as, he said quietly, call that number. My second in command will ensure you're relocated somewhere safe. New identity, new territory, new life. Jimmy will never find you. And if I don't think you're a monster? His smile was sad. Then I'll see you at dawn, and we'll face whatever comes together. Then he was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of pine and winter storms, and Marcia alone with the weight of a life in her hands. She didn't sleep. Instead, she made tea that went cold, stared at the card bearing Philip's name, and tried to reconcile the Alpha King who'd confessed to murder with the quiet customer who'd spent 2 years buying books he probably never read just to make sure she was okay. At 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Tell them he forced the bond. That you feared for your life. They'll believe you, everyone knows Alpha Kings take what they want. You'll be free of both of us. D. Jimmy. Somehow he'd gotten her new number. The invasion made her skin crawl, but the message revealed something crucial. He was scared. Desperate. If the council ruled in Philip's favor, Jimmy's complaint would backfire spectacularly. She deleted the text. At 4 a.m., another message. Different number. The bookstore lease is up for renewal next month. Would be a shame if the owner decided to sell to developers. Nice little shop, though. Be sad to see it become condos. Unknown. Threat. Barely veiled. Vote against Philip, or lose the one place she'd built something resembling a life. Marcia's hand shook as she blocked the number. At 5 a.m., a knock on her door, soft, careful, female. She checked the peephole and found Mrs. Wilma from 3C, the former trauma nurse Philip had mentioned. The older woman held a thermos and wore the expression of someone who'd seen too much suffering to bother with pretense. You look like hell, dear, Mrs. Wilma said when Marcia opened the door. Figured you could use actual breakfast instead of whatever anxiety tastes like. Despite everything, Marcia almost smiled. Did Philip send you? Philip doesn't send me anywhere. I'm retired, not owned. Mrs. Wilma pushed past her with the comfortable authority of someone who'd spent decades ordering people around operating rooms. But I've been watching you for 18 months, same as him, and I know what today means. She set the thermos on the counter, soup, from the smell, rich and nourishing, and fixed Marcia with a look that could have stripped paint. So here's what I'm going to tell you, and you can take it or leave it. Philip Jeff has been Alpha King for 300 years. 300. You know how many challenges he's survived? How many coups, assassination attempts, territory wars? Mrs. Wilma held up her hands. More than I have fingers to count. That male is a survivor. The council. The council is politics and posturing. They can't actually kill him unless he's committed treason or harmed innocents without cause. She paused. Which is why your testimony matters. You're the innocent. If you say he harmed you, controlled you, violated your autonomy, they have grounds. If you say he protected you when no one else would? Mrs. Wilma shrugged. Different story entirely. Marcia sank onto a stool. But he did control my life. Without asking. Without permission. Yes. That's not okay. No, it's not. Mrs. Wilma poured soup into a mug, pressed it into Marcia's hands. But here's what I learned in 40 years of trauma medicine: sometimes people do the wrong thing for the right reasons. Sometimes the choice isn't between good and evil, it's between bad and worse. That's not. Drink your soup and let me finish. Mrs. Wilma's voice gentled. Jimmy Cross put you in the hospital twice that I know of. Probably more times you had better. Philip Jeff kept you out of the hospital for 2 years. Both males made choices about your life without asking. One nearly killed you. The other kept you alive. The soup was warm, grounding. Marcia sipped it and tasted ginger, garlic, care. Philip admits what he did was wrong, Mrs. Wilma continued. Jimmy never did. Philip gives you the choice to walk away, even gave you an escape route. Jimmy sends threats at 4 a.m. She met Marcia's gaze. One of them respects you enough to accept consequences. The other just wants to own you. How do you know about the threats? Mrs. Wilma's smile was sharp. Because I'm not just a retired nurse, dear. I'm Philip's aunt. And I've been watching out for you because he asked me to, yes, but also because I wanted to. Because any female who survives what you survived and still finds reasons to smile at strangers deserves better than what this world gave her. Family. Philip had placed family in her building. The realization should have felt like another violation. Instead, it felt like something else entirely. Like maybe she'd never been as alone as she'd thought. The hearing starts in an hour, Mrs. Wilma said, checking her watch. I'll drive you if you want. Or you can take Philip's escape route and disappear. Either way, I'll still be in 3C if you need soup or someone to complain to about stubborn alpha kings who don't know how to ask for help properly. She headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth. Philip's been miserable for 300 years. Dutiful, powerful, respected, but miserable. Then you walked into that healing den, and for the first time in centuries, he had a reason to be something other than a weapon. Mrs. Wilma's expression softened. I'm not saying you owe him anything. But maybe consider whether the male who's been keeping you alive deserves a chance to explain why he thought that was worth more than following rules. Then she was gone, and Marcia was left with cooling soup, an hour until dawn, and a choice that would determine not just Philip's fate, but her own. Did she testify to the truth, that he'd controlled her life without permission, eliminated threats in the shadows, watched her without consent? Facts that damned him regardless of intention? Or did she testify to a different truth, that when the world looked away, he didn't? That his protection, however flawed, kept her alive when nothing else would? Both were true. Both were real. Only one would save him. Marcia showered, dressed in the navy blue dress she'd worn to the gathering, armor that had failed her once but was all she had, and stared at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back had scars, bruises, shadows under her eyes. But she was alive. And that had to count for something. She picked up her phone and dialed the number on Philip's card. The council chamber was older than most modern cities. Carved into the mountainside of the Northern Territory's sacred grounds, the circular room held benches of ancient oak arranged in ascending tiers, each seat worn smooth by centuries of wolves passing judgment on their own kind. At the center stood a simple stone platform, the testimony circle, where truth was supposedly impossible to hide. Marcia had heard stories. The circle was blessed by the moon goddess herself, they said. Lies spoken within it would burn the speaker's tongue, make their wolf recoil in agony. She'd always thought it was myth. Now, standing at the chamber's entrance as dawn light spilled through the skylight above, she prayed it was real. Because the only thing more terrifying than telling the truth was not knowing which truth to tell. The chamber was full. Not just the 7 council elders in their ceremonial robes, but hundreds of wolves from every major pack, alphas, betas, witnesses summoned to observe justice in action. She spotted Jimmy immediately, sitting in the front row beside a male who shared his sharp features and cruel mouth. His brother, probably. The one Philip said wouldn't be planning anything ever again. Except he looked very much alive and very pleased with himself. Philip stood alone in the testimony circle. No lawyers. No pack members flanking him in solidarity. Just the Alpha King in a simple black suit, hands clasped behind his back, silver eyes fixed on some distant point as Elder Sebastian Vernon read the charges in a voice that echoed off stone walls. Unlawful claiming of a mate without consent. Abuse of power. Extrajudicial killings. Violation of territory sovereignty. Vernon's gaze swept the chamber. These are not minor infractions. If proven, they constitute tyranny, grounds for immediate removal and execution. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Execution. They were really going to kill him. The accused has declined to defend himself, Vernon continued, stating that his actions speak clearly enough. Therefore, this hearing rests entirely on the testimony of the alleged victim. His eyes found Marcia in the doorway. Miss Marcia Rick, please approach the circle. Her legs moved on autopilot, carrying her down the center aisle. Wolves watched with expressions ranging from pity to contempt to morbid curiosity. She felt their judgment like physical weight, pressing down until each step became an act of defiance. When she reached the circle, Philip's gaze finally shifted to meet hers. No plea for mercy. No desperate hope. Just quiet acceptance, as if he'd already made peace with whatever she was about to say. I won't ask you to lie, he'd told her. Even now, facing death, he meant it. Marcia stepped into the circle, and power washed over her, ancient, overwhelming, absolute. Her wolf rose immediately, recognizing something primal and sacred. The moon goddess's blessing wasn't myth. It was covenant written in magic and bound by truth. She couldn't lie here even if she wanted to. Miss Rick, Vernon began, please state your relationship to the accused. I don't have one. The words came automatically, pulled by the circle's power. We met for the first time last night at the gathering. Shock rippled through the chamber. Philip's expression never changed. Yet he claimed you were under his protection, Vernon pressed. Claimed you publicly, in front of 500 witnesses. Yes. Without your prior knowledge or consent? Marcia's throat tightened. Without my knowledge. But consent, she paused, feeling the circle's magic pulse against her skin, demanding precision. I can't consent to something I didn't know was happening. Exactly. Vernon's smile was thin. So you confirm that Alpha King Philip Jeff has been controlling aspects of your life without permission. Making decisions on your behalf. Eliminating wolves he deemed threats to you. Yes. The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Did you ever feel safe because of his actions? Vernon asked, tone carefully neutral. I felt. Marcia stopped, struggling against the circle's demand for absolute truth. I felt confused. Violated. Angry that my autonomy was stripped away without my knowledge. Jimmy leaned forward, triumph gleaming in his eyes. But, Marcia continued, and the word cracked through the chamber like lightning, I'm also alive. And I wouldn't be if Philip hadn't intervened. Vernon's expression hardened. Please clarify. 2 years ago, my former mate put me in the hospital with fractured ribs and a sprained wrist. He told me it was my fault, that I'd provoked him, that if I just listened better, tried harder, loved him more, he'd stop. Her voice steadied, strengthened by fury she'd buried for too long. I believed him. For 3 years, I believed every lie, every excuse, every promise that next time would be different. The chamber had gone silent. Even the wolves who'd been whispering had stopped. After I escaped, I thought I was safe. Changed packs, changed my name, hid myself so completely I barely existed. Marcia's hands clenched into fists. But Jimmy found me anyway. 7 times, I was told. 7 times he hired trackers, bribed officials, showed up at my workplace. Alleged attempts, Jimmy's brother interrupted, standing. You have no proof. Sit down, Marcus. Philip's voice was soft, deadly. Let her finish. The brother, Marcus Cross, apparently related to the elder, hesitated, then sank back into his seat. Marcia continued, I didn't know about those 7 attempts because Philip stopped them. Without asking me. Without telling me. He made decisions about my safety that should have been mine to make. She turned to face Philip fully. That was wrong. It was a violation of my autonomy, my right to control my own life. Vernon looked satisfied. Then you agree. But it also kept me alive when no one else would. Marcia's voice rose. When I went to my own pack for help, they told me to work it out with my mate. When I reported Jimmy's violence, they said I had no proof. When I fled to the healing den, they documented my injuries and then let me walk back into danger because inter-pack politics mattered more than one female's life. She faced the council directly. Philip did what everyone else refused to do. He made me matter. He decided my life was worth protecting even when the entire wolf community had decided it wasn't. Tears burned her eyes. So yes, he violated pack law. Yes, he controlled my life without permission. But the alternative was death, and apparently that was acceptable to everyone else. The silence was deafening. The question isn't whether Philip broke rules, Marcia said. It's whether those rules are worth following when they protect abusers and abandon victims. When they value pack politics over female lives. When they allow males like Jimmy, she pointed at her former mate, to systematically destroy their partners while the council looks away. Vernon's face had gone pale. Miss Rick. I'm not finished. The circle's power surged through her, demanding she speak every truth she'd swallowed for years. You want to execute Philip for tyranny? Fine. But understand what you're really doing, you're telling every abused wolf in every pack that seeking protection outside official channels is a death sentence. You're saying that if the system fails you, you deserve whatever happens next. She stepped closer to Vernon, fearless. Philip gave me something no one else would, a chance to survive. If that's tyranny, then your justice system is broken beyond repair. The council chamber erupted. Wolves surged to their feet, shouting over one another, some in outrage at Marcia's accusations, others in reluctant agreement. Elder Vernon slammed his staff against the stone floor 3 times, the sharp cracks barely audible above the chaos. Order. We will have order. But the damage was done. Marcia had turned a hearing about Philip's guilt into an indictment of the entire council system, and everyone present knew it. Philip hadn't moved. He stood in the testimony circle watching her with an expression she couldn't read, something between awe and devastation, as if she'd just given him everything and nothing simultaneously. "Miss Rick," Vernon said, voice tight with barely controlled fury, "your emotional testimony is noted. However, the law is not subject to." The law failed her. The new voice came from the back of the chamber, female and razor-sharp. A woman descended the stairs, silver-haired, ancient, wearing traditional ceremonial robes that marked her as something beyond mere elder. High Priestess Rita. The moon goddess's voice on earth. Every wolf in the chamber immediately dropped to one knee, including the council. Including Philip. Marcia started to follow, but Rita's hand stopped her. "Not you, child. You stand in the circle. Truth speakers kneel to no one." The high priestess moved through the chamber like winter wind, her presence making the air itself feel heavier. She stopped at the circle's edge, studying Marcia with eyes that seemed to see straight through flesh to soul. "You carry a broken bond," Rita said quietly. "Corrupted. Festering. It's killing your wolf slowly." Marcia's hand flew to her chest instinctively. She'd known the bond with Jimmy felt wrong, but... "It will consume you completely within a year," Rita continued, matter of fact. "Your wolf will go feral trying to sever it, and you'll have to be put down for everyone's safety. That is the price of bonds formed in violence and sustained through fear." Horror flooded through her. "There's no way to." "There is one way." Rita's gaze shifted to Philip, still kneeling. "A true mate bond, fully formed and accepted, can override a corrupted one. Heal the damage. Restore the wolf." The chamber's silence was absolute. "But it requires consent," Rita said, looking back at Marcia. "Freely given. By both parties. And trust, something that cannot be commanded or manipulated." Her expression hardened. "Which is why what Philip did, however well-intentioned, may have destroyed your only chance at survival." The words hit like physical blows. Philip's head bowed, and Marcia saw his hands clench into fists against his thighs. "You see the problem," Rita addressed the council. "The Alpha King protected his potential mate without her knowledge, creating a foundation of control rather than choice. How can she freely accept a bond with someone who's been manipulating her life? How can she trust protection that came with surveillance? Even if she wanted to save herself, that wanting would be tainted by gratitude, obligation, desperation." "Which proves his guilt," Vernon said triumphantly. "His actions have condemned them both." "Or," Rita countered, "it proves that sometimes the law prioritizes rules over lives, and we lose both in the process." She turned to Philip. "Stand, Alpha King." He rose, and Marcia saw something in his face she'd never expected to see in a male who'd ruled for 3 centuries, defeat. Not because of the trial, but because he understood what Rita was saying. He'd been trying to save her, and instead he'd made her salvation impossible. "I'm dying anyway," Marcia said suddenly, the realization crashing through her. "Whether Philip is executed or exiled or freed, I'm dying. The corrupted bond will kill me." "Yes," Rita confirmed. "Then it doesn't matter." Marcia's laugh was bitter, edged with hysteria. "The council can execute him for tyranny, and I'll die within a year. Or they can exile him, and I'll die alone. Or they can free him, and I'll still die because I can't trust him enough to accept a bond that might save me." She looked at Philip. "You wanted to keep me alive. Congratulations. You failed." "Marcia," Philip's voice broke on her name. "No." She held up a hand. "You don't get to comfort me. You don't get to apologize. You did what you thought was right, and it wasn't enough, and now we both pay the price." Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of wolves who'd already decided she was either victim or pawn. "I hereby withdraw my testimony," Marcia announced. "The council can make whatever judgment they want. Execute him. Exile him. Parade him through the streets. I don't care anymore." She turned to leave the circle. And Jimmy struck. He moved with the speed of a wolf who'd been waiting for exactly this moment, crossing the chamber in a blur of motion. His hand locked around Marcia's throat before anyone could react, claws extended, pressing just hard enough to make breathing difficult. "If I can't have her," Jimmy snarled, "no one can." Chaos exploded. Wolves surged forward, but Jimmy's claws pricked Marcia's skin, drawing blood. One wrong move and he'd tear her throat out. "Stand down," Vernon commanded. "Everyone stand down." Philip had gone absolutely still, but his eyes burned with silver fire that promised death. "Let her go." "No." Jimmy's breath was hot against Marcia's ear. "See, I figured it out. The High Priestess just confirmed it, Marcia's dying anyway. So why should you get to play hero? Why should you get to keep her alive in your twisted little protection fantasy when I'm the one who actually bonded with her first?" His claws dug deeper, and Marcia felt warm blood trickle down her neck. "You took everything from me," Jimmy continued, voice shaking with rage. "Banished me. Humiliated me. Turned her against me. So now I take everything from you." "Jimmy," Marcia whispered, "this won't." "Shut up." He shook her hard enough to rattle her teeth. "You don't get to talk. You don't get to choose. You're mine, and if I can't have you alive." His claws pressed deeper. Philip's wolf exploded to the surface, and for the first time in 300 years, the Alpha King lost control. He shifted mid-lunge, massive, terrifying, more monster than wolf, and crossed the chamber in a heartbeat. But Jimmy was already moving, dragging Marcia backward toward the exit, using her as a shield. "One more step and she dies," Jimmy screamed. Philip froze, his wolf form trembling with barely restrained violence. "That's right," Jimmy laughed, high and wild. "The great Alpha King, stopped by one hostage. You're pathetic. All that power, all that control, and you can't do anything because you care. That's weakness." Marcia felt his claws pierce deeper, felt her vision start to blur. The corrupted bond pulsed, feeding on her fear, on Jimmy's rage, growing stronger as she grew weaker. This was how she died. Not from the corrupted bond over months, but here, now, in a council chamber full of wolves too afraid to intervene. Her gaze found Philip's, wolf bright and desperate and utterly helpless. "I'm sorry," she mouthed. "For not trusting him. For not accepting the bond that might have saved them both. For being too broken to believe in protection that didn't come with pain." Jimmy's claws tensed for the killing blow. And Marcia stopped fighting. Not surrender. Strategy. She let her body go completely limp, dead weight in Jimmy's arms, and his grip faltered for just a second. 1 second was all Philip needed. Philip moved like death-given form. His massive wolf body became a blur of silver and black, closing the distance before Jimmy could compensate for Marcia's sudden weight. Claws that had been pressed against her throat were suddenly ripped away as Philip's jaws locked around Jimmy's arm, bone crunching audibly in the stunned silence. Jimmy screamed, releasing Marcia. She collapsed to the stone floor, gasping, hand pressed against her bleeding neck. The world tilted and blurred, but through the chaos she saw Philip standing over Jimmy's writhing form, teeth bared, a growl rumbling from his chest that made every wolf in the chamber bare their throats in instinctive submission. "Don't kill him," Vernon shouted. "Alpha King, that's an order, you'll only prove their case." Philip's wolf turned its massive head toward the elder, and the look in those silver eyes said clearly, "I don't take orders. Not anymore. Philip." Marcia's voice was barely a whisper, but somehow he heard it through the blood roaring in his ears, through the wolf's demand for vengeance, through 300 years of carefully controlled violence finally unleashed. His gaze found hers. "Don't," she said again, forcing herself to sit up despite the pain, despite the blood still trickling down her neck. "Don't let him turn you into what they say you are." Something in Philip's eyes flickered, human thought wrestling with wolf instinct. "He deserves death." Philip's voice emerged from the wolf's throat, distorted but understandable. A rare gift among shifters, speaking in wolf form. "He tried to kill you." "Yes." Marcia met his gaze steadily. "But if you kill him here, now, they win. The council gets their proof of tyranny. Jimmy gets to be the victim. And her voice broke, I lose the only person who ever fought for me." Philip's massive form trembled, war raging inside him. High Priestess Rita stepped forward, her ancient power filling the space. "There is another way, Alpha King." Philip's wolf ears flicked toward her, listening. "The corrupted bond," Rita continued, approaching slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. "It exists because Jimmy forced it to continue through violence and fear. Every time he hurt her, he reinforced it. Every threat, every wound, every moment of terror, he fed the corruption." She knelt beside Marcia, examining the wounds on her neck with clinical precision. "But bonds can be challenged," Rita said. "Replaced. Not through death, through choice. True choice, untainted by obligation or desperation." Her eyes moved between Philip and Marcia. "The moon goddess allows it in cases of abuse. One chance to sever the corruption and form a bond based on actual consent." "How?" Marcia asked, hope warring with exhaustion. "A blood oath, witnessed by the pack and blessed by the goddess." "But," Rita's expression turned grave, "it requires both parties to offer something of equal value. A sacrifice that proves the bond's worth." Philip shifted back to human form, not caring that he stood naked in front of the entire council. Someone threw him a robe, which he ignored, focused entirely on Rita. "What kind of sacrifice?" "For you?" Rita looked at him. "Your power. Your title. Everything you've spent 300 years building. You would have to relinquish your position as Alpha King, willingly, in front of witnesses. Become nothing more than a common wolf." The chamber erupted again, wolves shouting disbelief, council members arguing over whether such a thing was even possible. An Alpha King had never voluntarily surrendered power. It wasn't done. It wasn't conceivable. "And for me?" Marcia asked quietly. Rita's gaze was gentle but unflinching. "Your independence. Your walls. Every defense mechanism you built to survive. You would have to trust him completely, not gradually, not carefully, but absolutely. Open your mind and heart fully to the mate bond, accepting all the vulnerability that comes with it." It was impossible. What Rita described was everything they'd each spent their lives protecting. Philip's power was his identity, his purpose, the only thing that had given meaning to 3 centuries of existence. Without it, he was nothing. And Marcia's walls were her survival, her safety, the only reason she'd made it through years of abuse. Trusting someone completely, letting them past every defense, it went against every instinct she'd honed. It was too much to ask. Too much to give. Philip looked at her, and Marcia saw the truth in his eyes. He would do it. Without hesitation, without regret. He would give up everything he was if it meant saving her. The realization stole her breath. "There's a condition," Rita added. "The sacrifice must be witnessed by the one who corrupted the bond. Jimmy must see what he destroyed, what true devotion looks like compared to his perversion of it. Only then will the moon goddess accept the assertance." Jimmy had been hauled to his feet by council guards, his arm hanging useless, face twisted with pain and hatred. "You're both insane," he spat. you'd give up everything for her? She's nothing, broken, weak, worthless. She's everything. Philip's voice was quiet, absolute. And I would give up eternity itself for one day of her truly free. He turned to Marcia, dropped to one knee on the cold stone floor, and offered his hand. I can't promise I'll be easy to love, Philip said. I'm old and damaged and I've done terrible things. I've controlled your life without permission, eliminated threats without consultation, watched you from shadows when I should have stepped into the light. I'm possessive and obsessive and I don't know where protection ends and obsession begins. Tears streamed down Marcia's face. But I can promise, Philip continued, that if you take my hand, I will never stop choosing you. Never stop fighting for you. Never stop believing you're worth every sacrifice, every risk, every moment of vulnerability I've avoided for 300 years. He took a breath. I offer you my power, my title, my throne. I offer you my heart, already yours whether you claim it or not. I offer you a bond where you hold all the control, all the choice, all the power, because that's what you deserve. What you've always deserved. His hand remained extended, steady despite the enormity of what he offered. So I'm asking you, Marcia Rick, will you trust me? Not because you're dying. Not because you're grateful. Not because you have no other choice. His silver eyes burned into hers. But because despite everything, some part of you believes I might be worth the risk? The chamber held its breath. Marcia looked at his hand, scarred, powerful, trembling ever so slightly, and thought about everything Rita had said. The corrupted bond was killing her. Within a year, she'd be gone. But more than that, she thought about Thursday evenings in a bookstore. About an apartment building full of people who cared. About 7 threats she'd never known existed because someone had considered her life worth protecting. About a male who'd broken every rule to keep her alive, and now offered to break himself to set her free. She placed her hand in his. Yes, she whispered. I'll trust you. And the moon goddess herself blessed what came next. The moment Marcia's hand touched Philip's, light exploded through the council chamber. Not fire. Not lightning. Pure moonlight, silver and ancient and impossibly bright, pouring down through the skylight as if the moon herself had descended to witness what was about to unfold. Every wolf in the chamber shielded their eyes, but Marcia and Philip remained locked in place, unable to look away from each other as power older than civilization itself wrapped around them. High Priestess Rita's voice rose above the chaos, chanting in the old language, words that predated written history, that had been passed down through countless generations of priestesses, spoken only in moments when the moon goddess's direct intervention was required. The light intensified, and Marcia felt it, the corrupted bond with Jimmy writhing inside her like a living thing, fighting to survive. It had fed on her pain for so long, grown fat on fear and trauma, and now it sensed its destruction approaching. Pain lanced through her chest. She gasped, nearly releasing Philip's hand, but his grip tightened. Stay with me, he commanded, voice steady despite the light burning around them. Whatever happens, don't let go. Rita's chanting reached a crescendo, and suddenly Marcia could see the bonds, visible as threads of light woven through her chest. The corrupted bond with Jimmy was black and red, pulsing with sickly energy, wrapped around her heart like barbed wire. And there, barely formed but glowing pure silver, was the potential bond with Philip, waiting, dormant, pristine. The sacrifice must be made. Rita's voice boomed with otherworldly authority. Alpha King Philip Jeff, do you freely relinquish your power? Philip never took his eyes from Marcia's. I do. The words resonated through the chamber, binding and absolute. Immediately, something shifted, a fundamental change in the air, in the way space itself bent around Philip's presence. The crushing weight of his alpha authority, that sense of overwhelming power that made lesser wolves instinctively submit, began to drain away. Marcia watched in horror as centuries of accumulated strength bled from him like water through cupped hands. His silver eyes dimmed. His broad shoulders seemed to carry less weight. The aura of danger and dominance that had surrounded him since she'd first seen him across the grand hall. Gone. Philip, no, she started, suddenly understanding the true cost of what he was giving up. Your turn, he said gently. Marcia Rick, do you freely accept the mate bond with all its vulnerability and trust? This was it. The moment of choice Rita had described. She had to open herself completely, tear down every wall, expose every fear, let Philip see all the broken, damaged parts she'd spent years hiding. The corrupted bond sensed her hesitation and squeezed, sending agony through her chest. She cried out, and Philip's face went white with helpless fury. Fight it, he urged. The corruption knows it's dying. Don't let it win. But the pain was overwhelming, dragging her back to every moment Jimmy had hurt her, every blow, every cruel word, every time she'd believed his lies that she deserved the abuse. The corrupted bond had become part of her survival mechanism, and letting it go meant facing all that trauma without protection. I can't, she sobbed. I'm too broken. You're not broken. Philip's voice cut through her spiral. You're surviving. There's a difference. Look at me, he commanded, and despite everything, she obeyed. His eyes, no longer silver and ancient, just human and honest and present, held hers with fierce intensity. I have lived 300 years, Philip said. I have commanded armies, toppled kingdoms, killed more wolves than I can count. I have been feared and respected and absolutely alone because power like mine doesn't allow for connection. It only allows for control. Tears streaked down his face. Then you walked into that healing den, bleeding and terrified and still refusing to surrender, and I felt something I hadn't felt in centuries, hope. Not hope that I could fix you or save you or control your story. Hope that maybe, despite everything I'd become, I could be part of something good. Something that mattered beyond territory and titles and endless, empty power. His grip on her hand tightened. So when you say you're too broken, I need you to understand, I'm not asking for perfect. I'm not asking for healed. I'm asking for real. All your scars and fears and walls, I want them. Because they're proof you survived. Proof you're stronger than anything that tried to destroy you. The corrupted bond writhed, desperate, but something in Marcia shifted. Not healing, not yet. But recognition. She wasn't broken. She was rebuilt. And maybe that was stronger than never being damaged at all. I accept, she whispered. Then louder, for the moon goddess and every witness, I accept the mate bond. Freely. Completely. With all its vulnerability and trust. The silver thread between them blazed. Power surged through the bond, not Philip's lost authority, but something entirely different. Pure connection, untainted by corruption or control. It flowed between them, and everywhere it touched, the corrupted bond with Jimmy began to dissolve. The black and red threads screamed, actually screamed, a sound that made every wolf in the chamber whimper, as they were unmade. Marcia felt them unraveling, felt years of trauma and pain being extracted like poison from a wound. And Jimmy felt it too. He collapsed, clutching his chest, howling as the bond he'd corrupted through violence was forcibly severed. No longer an invisible connection he could use to track her, to invade her thoughts, to maintain that sick sense of ownership. Just gone. The moonlight reached its peak, and Marcia felt the new bond with Philip settle into place. Not crushing or controlling. Not demanding or possessive. Just there, steady and strong and entirely hers to accept or reject as she chose. The light faded. Silence filled the chamber. Philip swayed where he knelt, exhausted from losing 300 years of accumulated power. He was just a male now, strong and skilled, but mortal. Finite. Vulnerable. And he was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. How do you feel? He asked quietly. Marcia took inventory. The constant ache in her chest was gone. Her wolf, previously cowering and broken, stirred with tentative hope. The shadows that had haunted her for years felt lighter, as if sunshine could finally reach them. Free, she breathed. I feel free. Then she kissed him. Not gentle. Not careful. But fierce and grateful and alive, pouring every emotion she couldn't name into that connection, feeling him respond with equal intensity, equal reverence. When they finally broke apart, High Priestess Rita was smiling. The moon goddess has accepted the sacrifice and blessed the bond, she announced. Marcia, Rick and Philip Jeff are true mates, recognized by divine law and pact covenant. She turned to the council. The charges against the former Alpha King are dismissed. He acted to protect his mate from a corrupted bond that would have killed her. Under divine law, such protection supersedes pact law. Her gaze hardened. However, Jimmy Cross stands accused of attempted murder, bond corruption, and abuse. Take him to the holding cells. His trial begins tomorrow. Guards dragged Jimmy away, still writhing from the severed bond, screaming threats that no one listened to. Elder Vernon looked shaken. If Philip is no longer Alpha King, who leads the Northern Territory? That, Rita said, looking directly at Marcia and Philip, is for the pacts to decide. But I suggest they choose wisely. Philip pulled Marcia close, and she let him, finally, completely, without fear. No more shadows? She asked. No more shadows, he promised. Just us. Together. Building something new. And for the first time in years, Marcia believed in tomorrow. Months later. The bookstore smelled like coffee and old paper and home. Marcia stood behind the counter, ringing up a customer's purchase, a romance novel with a wolf on the cover, appropriately enough, when she felt Philip's presence before she saw him. Not through the mate bond, though that hummed contentedly in the background. Just recognition. Familiarity. Love. He appeared in the doorway carrying 2 cups from the cafe next door, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. 3 months without Alpha King power, and he'd settled into mortal life with surprising grace. He still moved like a predator, still commanded attention when he entered a room, but the crushing weight of ancient authority was gone. He was just Philip now. And somehow, that was more than enough. Your usual, he said, sliding her cup across the counter. Extra foam, cinnamon, disgustingly sweet. You say that like you don't steal sips when I'm not looking. His smile was soft, real, the kind he'd never worn when power had armored him against connection. I have no idea what you're talking about. The customer left, and the bookstore fell into comfortable quiet. Outside, Riverside Park's small downtown bustled with afternoon activity, wolves going about their lives, secure in the knowledge that their territory was safe, protected, thriving. Protected by an unlikely pair, a former Alpha King who'd sacrificed everything for love, and a survivor who'd taught him that strength came in many forms. Council meeting went well, Philip said, settling onto the stool he'd claimed as his own. The Northern Territory officially elected Andrew Jeff as Alpha King. Your cousin? Third cousin, twice removed, but yes. He's young but capable. The packs trust him. Philip's expression was peaceful, unburdened. He'll do better than I did. Less obsessive. More willing to delegate. Marcia moved around the counter and wrapped her arms around him, breathing in his scent, pine and winter storms and safety. You did fine. You united the territories, protected countless wolves, and managed to be a terrifying legend for 3 centuries. And then I met you and became entirely human. He pulled her closer. Best trade I ever made. The bell above the door chimed, and Mrs. Wilma bustled in carrying what looked suspiciously like Tupperware containers. Don't mind me, she announced, heading straight for the break room. Just dropping off dinner. There's enough for 4, so invite someone over. You're both too skinny. We ate yesterday, Philip called after her. Yesterday doesn't count. You need consistent nutrition, not intermittent meals when you remember food exists. She reappeared, pointing at them sternly. I've been watching you for 18 months, remember? I know your habits. Eat the soup. Both of you. She swept back out before either could argue, leaving behind the smell of ginger and garlic and family. Marcia laughed. She's never going to stop, is she? Would you want her to? No. She really wouldn't. The bookstore had become more than just her workplace over the past 3 months. It had become a gathering place, wolves from various packs stopping by not just for books but for the sense of community that had built around it. Mrs. Wilma brought food. The couple from Tubi helped with heavy lifting. Other survivors of abuse found their way here, drawn by whispers that this was a safe space, that the female who ran it understood. Marcia had started a weekly support group. Nothing official, just coffee and conversation and the shared understanding that healing wasn't linear, that surviving meant different things to different people, that strength came from connection rather than isolation. Philip helped when asked, but mostly he stayed in the background, present but not hovering, protective but not controlling. Learning, slowly, to trust that she could handle herself while knowing he'd be there if she needed him. It was imperfect and messy and absolutely nothing like the romance novels she sold. It was real. And that made it perfect. Jimmy's trial verdict came through, Philip said quietly. 15 years in the council's maximum security facility. No parole eligibility. His brother Marcus Cross was stripped of his elder position for attempting to manipulate the hearing. Marcia absorbed this, waiting for some feeling to surface, satisfaction, vindication, relief. Instead, she just felt tired. Good, she said finally. That's good. You don't sound convinced. I am. It's just, she struggled for words, I spent so long wanting justice, wanting him to pay for what he did. And now that he has, it doesn't feel like I thought it would. It doesn't erase the years. Doesn't undo the damage. Philip turned to face her fully, hands gentle on her shoulders. Justice isn't about erasing the past. It's about protecting the future. He can't hurt you anymore. Can't hurt anyone else. That matters. Does it bother you? Marcia asked. That you didn't get to be the one to punish him? 3 months ago? Yes. My wolf wanted his throat. Wanted blood and vengeance and absolute destruction. Philip's smile was wry. Now? I'd rather spend my energy on this, on us, on building something good instead of destroying something bad. Turns out mortality gives you perspective. Any regrets? About giving up my power? He pretended to consider. Well, I do miss terrifying people into submission with a single look. And the throne was remarkably comfortable. Anne. She swatted his arm. I'm serious. So am I. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Zero regrets, Marcia. Not one. I spent 300 years as Alpha King, and I was hollow. Important but empty. Powerful but utterly alone. His silver blue eyes, still beautiful without the supernatural glow, held hers. Then I spent 3 months as just Philip, your mate, and I felt more alive than in all those centuries combined. Tears pricked her eyes. I love you. I know. He grinned at her expression. What? I can feel it through the bond. Constant, steady, absolutely terrifying in the best way. Terrifying? You scare me more than any alpha challenger ever did, he admitted. Because losing a fight just means death. Losing you would be something far worse. She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, Philip rested his forehead against hers. What do you want, Marcia? For the future. For us. I know we've been taking things day by day, but I want this, she said immediately. The bookstore. The community we're building. The life where we're just two wolves trying to figure things out. She paused. Maybe eventually a house instead of an apartment. A garden. A dog. A dog? You spent 300 years being a wolf. Don't you want to see what having an actual pet is like? His laugh was warm, unguarded. With you? I want everything. The bell chimed again, a young female wolf, nervous, clutching a book recommendation list Marcia had created for survivors. Philip squeezed her hand once, then retreated to the back room, giving them privacy. Marcia smiled at the newcomer. Hi. Welcome. Can I help you find something? And as the afternoon stretched into evening, as customers came and went, as Philip emerged periodically to refill her coffee or steal kisses when he thought no one was looking, Marcia realized something profound. She was happy. Not healed, healing was ongoing, would probably be lifelong. Not perfect, she still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at unexpected sounds. But genuinely, authentically happy in a way she'd thought impossible 2 years ago. The world hadn't become safe. Wolves like Jimmy still existed. The systems that had failed her were still broken, still needed work. But she wasn't alone anymore. Wasn't invisible. Wasn't fighting to survive every single day. She was living. Building. Choosing. And she had a mate who'd literally given up everything to ensure she could. That night, after the bookstore closed, after they'd eaten Mrs. Wilma's soup, after they'd settled on the couch with books and comfortable silence, Philip spoke. Thank you. Marcia looked up. For what? For taking my hand that day in the council chamber. For trusting me when I'd given you every reason not to. For seeing past the alpha king to the male underneath who just wanted, his voice caught, who just wanted to matter to someone. She set down her book and climbed into his lap, wrapping herself around him. You matter to me. You've always mattered. Even when I didn't know your name, even when I was too scared to accept what we could be, you mattered. Through the mate bond, she felt his emotions, love, gratitude, wonder that after 300 years of lonely power, he'd found this. Found her. Found home. We're going to be okay, Marcia whispered against his neck. Both of us. Together. Yeah, Philip agreed, holding her like she was precious, like she was chosen, like she was everything. We really are. Outside, the moon rose over riverside-packed territory, full and silver and eternal, blessing two wolves who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to build something bright. And in a small bookstore that smelled like coffee and old paper and love, two broken souls continued the slow, imperfect, beautiful work of healing. Together. Thank you so much for watching this story unfold. I hope Philip and Marcia's journey touched your heart the way it touched mine while creating it. If you enjoyed this emotional werewolf shifter romance, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about love, healing, and second chances. Drop a comment below telling me what you thought. Did you cry? Did you cheer when Philip gave up his power? What was your favorite moment? And remember, beautiful souls, you are worth protecting. You are worth choosing. You deserve love that builds you up instead of tearing you down. Until next time, keep believing in happily ever after. They're out there. Sometimes they just come wrapped in unexpected packages.